Tragic day. Today our hearts and our prayers go out to those who were murdered, those who were injured in the terrorist attack in Brussels. In particular, we are lifting up in prayer the 3 Americans, the Mormon missionaries from Utah, who were wounded in those attacks. We are praying for their swift recovery. We're praying for their families and the families of everyone who was wounded and murdered today. It's important to understand what happened today was not a lone wolf. It was not an isolated attack, but it was an act of war. It was an act of war carried out by radical Islamic terrorists. ISIS has claimed responsibility for this attack. And we are facing jihad from terrorists who have set their objective to murder as many Europeans as possible, to murder as many Israelis as possible, and to murder as many Americans as possible. And today's attack underscores the need for a strong commander-in-chief who will call this evil by its name and unleash the full force and fury of the United States of America to defeat radical Islamic terrorism and to utterly destroy ISIS. If I am elected president, that is what we will do. The number one responsibility of the president is to keep this country safe, to protect the lives of Americans, to protect our national security. And for 7 years, we've had a president who is so captive to political correctness that he refuses even to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism, much less take the steps necessary to keep this country safe. Enough is enough. We need a president who stands up to our enemies and defeats our enemies. And come January 2017, that's exactly what we're going to have.
As far as you being here in New York, now you did talk about New York values in the past. Now you are talking to a number of New York County GOP chairmen, some funders in here. Are you looking to cut into some of Donald Trump's hometown pride here, or no?
The New York Republican primary is going to be a critical primary. New York, for the first time in a long time, is going to have a real voice in selecting the Republican nominee, and we are competing vigorously here in the state of New York. We are competing vigorously to earn votes and earn delegates here in New York. We have a very strong grassroots team on the ground. We believe we can compete very effectively. New York decides this congressional district by congressional district. And we are working to earn votes at this point. This race is effectively a two-man race between me and Donald Trump. And nationwide, 65 to 70% of Republicans recognize that Donald Trump is not the best candidate to go head-to-head with Hillary Clinton. That if Donald Trump is the nominee, Hillary wins. And if Hillary wins, the Supreme Court is lost for a generation. The Bill of Rights is lost. Our children are buried in trillions more in debt. Their future is put into real jeopardy. And as today's attacks underscore, if Hillary Clinton is elected president, we will continue the same policies of weakness and appeasement that have enabled the rise of radical Islamic terrorism and that jeopardize the safety and security of Americans. New Yorkers want a safe and secure America. New York saw firsthand the tragic consequences of radical Islamic terrorism on September 11th. And we need a president who is vigorous keeping this country safe. I believe the New York primary will be very competitive. And I'm encouraged by the support we're seeing on the ground from New Yorkers.
Senator, Democrats are pounding you for your calls to patrol and police Muslim neighborhoods. And they say that you are calling for a police state in Muslim neighborhoods.
You know, sadly, it is not news when Democrats attack. And it says something that Democrats attack not directed at radical Islamic terrorists, not directed at the jihadists that are seeking to murder us, but instead at anyone who dares speak the truth about who they are. The political correctness of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and the entire Washington Democratic Party has left the world of the bizarre and entered the world of the absurd. In the wake of the Paris attacks, in the wake of San Bernardino, in the wake of Brussels, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and the Democrats refuse even to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. And instead, the president has made a practice of holding national television conferences to lecture Americans on Islamophobia. Enough is enough. We need a president who directs our national security, our military, and our law enforcement at defeating the enemy. And there are real consequences. You know, some in the media ask, what difference does it make? As Hillary Clinton so famously put it in another context. What difference does it make what words are used? This is not simply a question of semantics. When the president refuses to identify who our enemies are, it has a real impact on their policy. So, for example, because President Obama doesn't acknowledge that radical Islamic terrorism has declared war on America, President Obama and Hillary Clinton support bringing tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees to America. This is despite the fact that ISIS has stated its intention to infiltrate those refugees, to send jihadists to America to murder Americans, and this is despite the fact that the head of the FBI, James Comey, who was appointed by President Obama, told Congress that the FBI cannot vet those refugees to make sure that they are not ISIS terrorists. I've introduced legislation in the United States Senate that would suspend refugees from any country where ISIS or al-Qaeda control substantial territory, because the first obligation must be to keep this country safe. Another consequence.
But what do you say to Muslim Americans who are concerned about your comments about policing their neighborhoods?
Listen, Muslim Americans, like all Americans, are bearing the consequences of jihadists waging war against them. Muslims as well are killed by radical Islamic terrorists in the Middle East and elsewhere. And if you look here in the city of New York had a proactive policing program that Mayor Michael Bloomberg championed to work cooperatively with the Muslim community to prevent radicalization, to stop radical Islamic terrorists from carrying out terror attacks before they occur. And Mayor Bill de Blasio, when he came in a peak of political correctness, canceled the program. That is refusing to acknowledge the threat that we have, and the world is too dangerous to deny reality. One of the other consequences of the Obama administration's political correctness is the San Bernardino terrorist, the female terrorist. When she came in, before she came to America, she publicly posted on social media abroad a call to jihad. But the Obama administration refuses to look at social media because it's inconsistent with political correctness. And so we let in someone who was an open and outspoken jihadist. Now, she submitted on her visa application a fake address in Pakistan. And yet the vetting that President Obama and Hillary Clinton assure us will protect us from terrorists failed to discover that it was a made-up address. It was a phony address. Political correctness costs lives. And it is standard law enforcement, it is good law enforcement, to focus on where threats are emanating from, and anywhere where there is a locus of radicalization, where there is an expanding presence of radical Islamic terrorism. We need law enforcement resources directed there. We need national security resources directed there. The object should be to keep Americans safe, to keep everyone safe.
How specifically would you patrol Muslim neighborhoods? What would you do specifically to patrol Muslim neighborhoods?
What you would do is what I just described. You would continue the proactive policing that we saw here in New York. You would reinstate the program that Mayor de Blasio canceled because political correctness was more important to him than protecting our safety. You would direct resources at where the threat is coming from. And I will say, listen, I understand that those in the media are horrified that anyone would actually speak the truth about radical Islamic terrorism. I will apologize to nobody with how vigorous I will be as president fighting radical Islamic terrorists. And let me make a very clear statement to jihadists across the face of the globe. Your day of reckoning is coming. This weakness, this appeasement that you have seen for 7 years, it will end on January 20th, 2017. And on that date, we are coming after you. We are coming after you if you are a jihadist. We are not coming after you to negotiate with you. We are not coming after you to interrogate you. We are coming after you to kill you. If you declare war on America, America will defend itself. That is the only way to respond to acts of war from ISIS. ISIS is the face of evil, and it is their intention to murder as many Americans as they can, and we need a president who stands up to them and defeats them. The strategy on radical Islamic terrorism, to borrow a page from Ronald Reagan and the Cold War, should be very simple. We win, they lose.
Senator, I think that the thing is that you have advisors that have pushed for congressional panels to investigate and kind of root out what you call extremism within the Muslim American community. And now you're suggesting patrolling and securing these Muslim neighborhoods, particularly Muslim neighborhoods. Do you understand why people can conjure this up when they're looking at the 30s in Europe or the 40s here with Japanese Americans in internment camps? Do you understand why people have those images that come to mind?
I understand that there are those who seek political advantage and try to raise a scary specter. We need a president and we need law enforcement that focuses on the threat. It is standard law enforcement. If you have a neighborhood that is plagued by gang activity, it is standard and good law enforcement to direct more resources, to work with the community that is facing gang activity, to stop the gang members, to take them off the street. And I would note, in a community with increased gang activity, it is the law-abiding citizens of the community that pay the price in property damage, that pay the price in terms of rapes and sexual assaults and physical assaults, that pay the price in terms of drive-by shootings and murders. And so it is standard good policing to direct your resources to where the threat is coming from. We should do the exact same thing with radical Islamic terrorism. And if you want to see how not to do it, look at many of the isolated communities in Europe, where Europe's immigration policies have allowed a massive influx of radical Islamic terrorism into Europe. And they have isolated and secluded neighborhoods where radicalism festers. And it leads to the kind of attacks we saw today. We need to be directing our efforts at stopping that from happening, stopping isolated communities from festering jihadism. We need to work proactively with the Muslim community, cooperatively, just like when law enforcement is going after gang activity, you work with the community where gangs are located to prevent those acts of violence. In this case, we're not talking about criminal activity, we're talking about acts of war. And this president, just like Mayor de Blasio here in New York, refuses to use the tools we have because he's more interested in following his partisan political agenda than he is in keeping Americans safe.
But what constitutes a Muslim neighborhood?
Ensure that that's a productive and constructive relationship and not an adversarial one between law enforcement and Muslim communities.
You do so by working cooperatively with those communities. Listen, I would note, one of the strongest leaders worldwide in targeting radical Islamic terrorism is President al-Sisi in Egypt. Now, an example of just how backwards the Obama administration's foreign policy is. When Mubarak was toppled in Egypt and replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Obama administration celebrated. That was a catastrophic day from U.S. national security perspective. The Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi, who took over there. The Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. I've introduced legislation in the United States Senate to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. They fund radical Islamic terrorists who seek to murder Americans, to murder Israelis, to murder Europeans. And yet the Obama administration celebrated the Muslim Brotherhood taking over in Egypt. Egypt had been a long and reliable ally, but Mubarak had a poor record on human rights, but a stellar record standing with America and standing with Israel against terrorism. When al-Sisi took over, the Obama administration condemned al-Sisi, and yet al-Sisi has been a relentless opponent of radical Islamic terrorism. And, I wrote a book last year, Time for Truth. In that book, I quote at some length a speech that President al-Sisi gave a little over a year ago, January 1st of last year, at Cairo University. That was the same university that in 2009, Barack Obama, as part of his World Apology Tour, stood at Cairo University and said, Iran has a right to nuclear technology. profoundly foolish and foolhardily. It was the essence of political correctness, and yet it jeopardized the safety and security of Americans. Well, al-Sisi gave, on January 1st of last year, an incredibly brave speech where he called out radical Islamic terrorism. Now, al-Sisi is a Muslim. He is a Muslim leader of a Muslim country. And that was an act of courage. For al-Sisi to call out radical Islamic terrorism, he was literally putting a bounty on his own head. The jihadists want to murder President al-Sisi. He knew that. And he did so with courage and moral clarity. And it is tragic that the president of Egypt shows more courage confronting radical Islamic terrorism than does the president of the United States. Indeed, today, President Obama is happily at a baseball game, yucking it up with the Castros, communist dictators, rather than being in America and directing the effort to defeat ISIS, rather than traveling to Brussels and standing with our friends and allies. And just yesterday, President Obama stood by the side of Raul Castro as Raul Castro attacked America. And President Obama agreed with Castro's attacks on America. It is not too much to ask for the President of the United States to defend America, not to side with communist dictators who hate us, who oppress and murder their citizens, and who spread terrorism throughout Latin America. We need a president whose priorities are keeping America safe. And the attack today underscores the need for a strong commander-in-chief.
Does this make you rethink your position on torture? Sisi tortures people.
America has never engaged in torture, and we are not going to. But we will utilize interrogation techniques that are effective to keep this country safe. And we will utilize law enforcement. We will utilize national security. We will utilize military force. When it comes to ISIS, right now what we are doing is woefully ineffective. We drop a bomb here, a missile there. It's photo op foreign policy. It looks good on CNN, but it doesn't actually defeat the enemy. If I am elected president, we will use overwhelming air power to carpet bomb ISIS into oblivion. We will destroy their command and control facilities. We will destroy their infrastructure. We will destroy their communication. We will destroy their transportation. We will destroy the oil fields. We will destroy the refineries. We will destroy their troops and manpower. And we will arm the Kurds, our friends and allies who are boots on the ground, who are fighting ISIS, and yet the Obama administration, for political reasons, will not arm them. And we will utilize our special forces and troops as needed to utterly destroy ISIS. And we will do so not with the rules of engagement that the Obama administration sends our troops into battle with, rules of engagement that tie their arms behind their back, that make it impossible for them to defend themselves. Instead, if and when U.S. military force is required, we should use overwhelming force, kill the enemy, and then get the heck out. Thank you.